Okay, welcome everyone. This is ISO 14001 2015 update, part 2. We had part 1 a couple weeks ago. Not sure how many of you guys might have participated in that, but this is part 2. Part 1 is available on PJR's website, previously recorded. You can watch that recording as well as the slides. We'll recap a little bit anyway for any of you guys who might have missed part 1. You can always go back and view the full presentation as well. All right, it's 11 o'clock now. We'll give everyone another minute or two to join before we jump in. All right, well, anyone who's running a little bit late can always watch the recorded webinar and get caught back up. I don't want to hold anyone up. I want to make sure we've got plenty of time here. So again, welcome. This is the update for ISO 14001 2015 version of the standard. This is part 2 of the webinar. Again, we had part 1 a couple of weeks ago, hosted by Scott Jones. That's available on the website, the recording as well as the slides. This presentation will also be available after the fact on PJR's website, a recording of the presentation as well as the slides. I want to thank everyone for participating today. My name is Austin Matthews. I'm the EHS Assistant Program Manager with PJR. I'm coming to you not from headquarters. I work from home in Pennsylvania, but on behalf of PJR. Scott Jones again did part 1. He's traveling abroad, so I'm filling in for part 2. Again, thank you all for joining us. I'm sure we have a diverse group again as we did last time, and that's great. This is beneficial for people looking to be certified to the standard, auditors, consultants, just really a broad spectrum as we talk about the changes for ISO 14001 2015 standard, which was just released. We'll get into all of that. Thank you again for joining us. We'll talk about the agenda in a minute. Just for those of you who may not know me, I'm fairly new to this role. Again, I'm the EHS Assistant Program Manager, Austin Matthews. I'm sure some of you have seen my emails come out. It's possible that we've interacted before, but in case not, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm also a lead auditor for ISO 9001, 14001, 18000, OSAS 18001, R2, RIOS, e-stewards, and responsible care management, RCMS. So that's a little bit about me. The agenda for today, we'll talk a little bit about PJR, what we do, what we're able to assist with, benefits and drivers of ISO 14001 certification, a status update as to the ISO 14001 2015 revisions, key changes. Again, this is part 2 of 2. Part 1 was a couple of weeks ago, but we will recap a little bit what was covered in part 1, so you'll see some overlap if you've attended both webinars. Certification and transition requirements. We'll talk about how that process works for clients new to the certification process looking to be certified to ISO 14001 2015, as well as clients who will be transitioning their certification from the 2004 version of ISO 14001. We'll save all questions till the end. But if you look on your dashboard, there's a section for questions. Please feel free at any point in the presentation to type your questions in there, and we will get to as many as possible at the end of the presentation before we are out of time. We've got an hour total, so let's see what we've got. Okay, so again, we'll start a little bit about PJR. We're a leading 14,001 registrar. This map and this list of countries shows a little bit of where we've certified companies. It's not all inclusive, obviously, but it certainly gives you an idea that worldwide we can help your company, meet your company's needs as far as ISO 14001 certification. 14001 is not the only standard to which we certify companies as well. This includes various other standards, as I mentioned before. Again, this is probably not an all-inclusive list, but it certainly gives you an idea of the different standards we can certify to. ISO 9001, R2, RIOS, eStewards, the list goes on, and you can see that here, as well as our website if you are looking for any more information. As far as the benefits of getting certified, there are many. Here are a few to highlight. Assisting companies meeting their legal requirements. Certainly the standard requires you to identify what legal requirements are applicable to you, how you will meet those requirements, and maintain compliance with those requirements. Also improving the organization's environmental performance through many avenues, including meeting your legal requirements as well as performance objectives. Management commitment and employee engagement are certainly stressed throughout the standard, as well as perhaps more so in the 2015 revision, and we'll get to that. Business management, notably stakeholder requirements, maintaining public image, integrating different business management systems. That's certainly the case, and with the 2015 version and the revisions currently going on with 9001 and next year OSAS 18001, we'll see further alignment in those standards to be able to have an easier integration process. If you want to combine some of those different standards, these revisions will make that even easier to do. Supplier environmental performance certainly extends to these controls, these requirements of the standard extend to suppliers, help you flow down those expectations so that not only are you holding yourself, your management system, your employees to certain requirements that can have an impact on who you're willing to do business with, the expectations that they're required to meet to do business with you so that you can continue to meet your requirements. That can certainly have an impact on suppliers as well. It can provide a competitive advantage if you are being considered with several other companies and your standard certifications set you, apart from the rest, show that your commitment perhaps is stronger than others. You always have that in your pocket to be able to advertise that you are maintaining that certification. And there can be various financial benefits as well for environmental specifically. A lot of times the environmental performance management and objectives and targets may lead to cost savings as far as energy reductions, waste reductions, increased reuse of materials, things like that. So we've seen various types of financial benefits there as well. Commitment to environmental protection and conservation, being certified to this standard shows a greater environmental commitment. Again, reduction of your environmental impact as far as being aware of the risks surrounding your operations, your services provided, and doing what you can going above and beyond to reduce those risks, those impacts. Again, can give you an edge over other companies as well. Business management drivers, customer requirements, public image, we sort of discussed those already. But again, maintaining these certifications goes pretty far for your public image as well. So those are various reasons, various benefits. I'm sure you can think of others, but those are a few to highlight. As far as the 14001 version of the standard itself, we had the final draft, which was reviewed and voted on, and the final version, the actual version of the standard, was actually published yesterday. So September 15th, 2015. I'm not sure how many, or perhaps all of you are already aware of that, but wanted to certainly stress that the standard has now been released and is available for purchase from the ISO website to be able to start that process. So when we talk about the transition process, when we talk about deadlines and time frames, everything starts, the clock starts from September 15th, 2015. Again, that was yesterday, so we'll get to that a little bit later, but keep that date in mind. In terms of why the standard was revised, this again is a little bit of a recap from Part 1, but obviously these standards are getting reviewed and revised frequently. Typically it's every 4 years, so since this was last revised in 2004, we were certainly overdue for some updates. We want to make sure that ISO 14001 continues to serve its organizations and stays relevant. In terms of revising the standard, not only do we want to update it, we also want to make sure it's relevant for the future, future-proof, if you will, in terms of how the companies being certified are changing, how technology is changing, how realistically these standards can be applied, as well as taking into consideration feedback that might be received from companies being certified to the standard, auditors responsible for auditing to the standard, certification bodies responsible for upholding those requirements, etc. You get the idea. But certainly every number of years these standards get reviewed, and that's how the process works. That's why we were certainly overdue for a revision. The high-level structure has changed. This is new to 2015 and is going to be consistent with some of the other standard revisions I mentioned, 9001, some of the other standards forthcoming in the coming years. OSAS 18001 will be coming an ISO standard. I believe 45001 will be the name there. I'd have to check that, but if memory serves, it's 45001 when that revision comes out. The high-level structure basically is a framework that will be common across the standards for the management system. It'll include a lot of identical text, common terms, core definitions, trying to get on the same page, a level playing field, to make it easier to integrate various standards. Again, also it's designed to benefit users implementing multiple standards. So again, the idea is that there will be some consistency, some similarities, make it easier to transition and integrate various certifications. Annex SL is the new framework. It's a standardized structure format. I already touched on some of these items, and again, this is from Part 1. Common text requirements, it will be used in ISO 9001 revision as well. Yeah, okay, so and ISO 45001, which will be the new name for OSAS 18001 when that gets revised. So we can confirm that there. Here's the structure, basically the table of contents. We have 10 sections. The first 6 were covered in Part 1 of the webinar, which again you can get from PGR's website if you missed that. We're going to be focusing today on sections 7 through 10, which were not discussed in Part 1. So we'll go through each of those clauses of the standard and discuss some of those key changes. But here overall you can see the Annex SL structure overall. Again, to reiterate some of the key changes in the standard, there's increased emphasis on leadership, maybe more flexibility in how that leadership is defined, how roles and resources are allocated, but certainly more of an emphasis on holding leadership accountable for the effectiveness, for the implementation of these standards. So more specific language around that, again, to increase accountability. There's a focus on risk management, maybe broadening the scope of risks, what gets considered when a company is identifying its risks and implementing controls as needed. We'll talk about that. An emphasis on objectives, measurement, and change. This language was always in the standard, but again, it's a little bit stronger, more of an emphasis on how those objectives are going to be measured, how you're going to drive that change, and how you're going to be able to show an auditor that that's going on. Stresses communication and awareness, again, broadening the scope a little bit, including other areas to be considered when you're identifying your communication processes. It's a little bit more specific to make sure, you know, we're not missing anything, we're incorporating everything that is intended to be addressed through the communication processes that get implemented, making sure that employees, subcontractors, anyone really affected has that level of awareness that the standard is trying to drive. Overall, too, you'll see fewer prescriptive requirements. So the standard will incorporate more general information, more general requirements, giving clients more flexibility as far as how they want to implement those changes. You'll see specifically much less prescriptive requirements for documentation, where we had to have a documented manual, several documented procedures. Those requirements have been removed, giving the companies more flexibility to determine how they want to meet those requirements. And for many of you, it may continue to be documented procedures. If that is what works best for your system, they're already implemented. Maybe you make some tweaks and you keep them. Otherwise, it's completely up to you as far as how you meet those requirements in terms of not having to maintain those documents. If you choose to go another route and it meets the requirements of the standard, you no longer have to maintain those documents. So if it was the sort of thing where you really kept them on the shelf or on the computer and dusted them off right before your audit, they weren't really providing adding a lot of value for your organization, this will be helpful for you, sort of updating with the technology changes to acknowledge that there are other ways of maintaining those ideas. So those are some of the key changes. Again, we've got an emphasis on protecting the environment. These are some terms that are called out in the standard. I'm not going to read all of the verbiage now that you guys can obtain your own version of the standard. You'll have access to that. And of course, the verbiage is here on the slides as well, which will be available for review. But again, protecting the environment, prevention of pollution, sustainable resource use, all of these different ideas to be considered. Environmental performance, there's a shift in emphasis again towards continual improvement, environmental performance specifically, and that was covered in Part 1. Life cycle thinking is new as well, again, broadening the scope of risk to be evaluated. Life cycle thinking is a different approach, or a more all-inclusive approach to be aware of the impact your products or services are having as far as you're able to impact them. So we'll talk about that again as well. Terms related to support and operation, I've pulled out a few that I think are especially key as we get into these sections in Part 2 of the webinar. Competence is stressed, the ability to apply knowledge and skills to achieve intended results. Documented information is new to the 2015 revision, and we'll talk about that some more. Again, documented information, for those of you who are not aware, is meant to replace the terms document, record, things like that, to be more all-inclusive in terms of however your organization feels is best to maintain that evidence. So you'll see that verbiage repeated throughout the standard. You're given more leeway, you're given more freedom to determine what is going to work best for you. We as auditors need to be able to see that those processes are being maintained, and you have the term documented information available to give you quite a bit more leeway as to how you meet those requirements. So here's the definition for that term, and we'll come back to that. Again, life cycle, they define it here, and again, the emphasis here will be on the portions of which you're able to impact. So aspects that your organization has control over. Certainly, there are some that you will have a direct impact on, and others will be further removed from your operation. You may find still that you have some impact on those areas in terms of which suppliers or contractors or materials you use to complete your processes, whether upstream or downstream. So that may be something to consider as well when you're thinking about the life cycle perspective. Outsourcing, I'm sure we're all familiar with this term, but in case not, here's the definition. And again, to the extent that you're able to impact, especially when it comes to your environmental performance, we want to be thinking about outsourcing. So whenever there's the potential for outsourcing to impact your environmental performance, we want to be thinking about what operational controls we may need, what we may need to communicate, what risks we may need to be aware of, and how to react to those types of things. Process is certainly a term that we're all familiar with as well, but again, with the change for 2015 revision, we're seeing more of an emphasis on processes instead of documented procedures. So having a process in place to meet the various requirements of the standard instead of necessarily a documented procedure, giving you that extra leeway. So we want to make sure we understand what process is meant to mean. Continual improvement, again, for terms related to performance evaluation, a term that we're familiar with, but we have a definition here, and environmental performance as well. So environmental performance is definitely stressed in the 2015 revision, so make sure you're aware of what is meant by that term. Okay, so for the remainder of the presentation, or a bulk of the remainder of the presentation, we're going to look at the actual verbiage of the standard. I've copy and pasted on the following slides the exact portions of the standard, and I won't read everything. You guys are more than welcome to do that on your own, and the verbiage is on the slides, but we'll highlight some key areas, and then we'll talk about the rest of the transition process and have time for questions as well. And again, if you have questions as we go throughout, please be typing those in, and we can address them at the end. Don't want you to forget your questions. Okay, so the first, Section 7, is support. It addresses the adequacy of resources, competency, awareness, requirements around those areas, internal and external communication, and maintaining the necessary documented information, which is new to the 2015 revision. We see an emphasis on competency versus training. So there was always an emphasis on, did you conduct training? Did you have the training record? Was training effective? And now we're broadening that a little bit, because competency can be achieved through various avenues, and you want to make sure people in various roles, especially the more significant of an impact it has on your environmental performance, that they're competent to be doing those items, whatever it is that they're responsible for doing. So competency is key. And you'll need to be able to demonstrate that competency has been evaluated and the employees are competent. And again, you've got documented information giving you some flexibility as far as how you do that and how you provide evidence for that. It expands considerations for the communication process. I touched on that already. Decreased prescriptive documentation requirements. An expansion in the documentation formats, what you can use to meet documented information. Again, updating the standard as far as the various changes in technology since the 2004 version and how companies across the board are implementing those changes and making use of different forms of technology to be able to maintain their management systems. And again, emphasis on processes themselves versus documented procedures. 7.1 is resources, not any significant changes, but again, you've got the verbiage here, so I'm going to quickly go through these. 7.2 represents competence, and again, determining what those competency requirements are, ensuring that employees in those roles, employees, subcontractors, anyone in that role is competent and gives you various avenues to which you can attest someone is competent. Also training needs, because there will still be training requirements, I'm sure, in various areas. And then where applicable, taking action to acquire the necessary competence. If an employee is not already competent or their competence comes into question, what actions will be taken to get them to where they need to be, and then evaluating the effectiveness of those items. The note here gives you some leeway, again, as far as how those items can be achieved. And then the verbiage at the end, shall retain appropriate documented information as evidence of competence. So you'll see that verbiage throughout the standard. Again, the organization determines what that means, what works for you, and as long as, you know, during audits and similar events, that can be brought forth and made clear, that's what we're going to be looking for. Awareness, separate section as far as separating competence, awareness. What do employees, subcontractors, excuse me, etc., what do they need to be aware of? And this breaks down for you in the 2015 revision exactly what those requirements are, what everyone needs to be aware of. Pretty straightforward. And then again, in terms of communication, same idea. When implementing this process, it's breaking down for you what needs to be considered, what will be communicated, when, to who, how will it be communicated, and broadening a little bit in terms of internal and external communication and what those requirements will be. Requiring organizations to respond to relevant communications as far as their environmental management system is concerned. Retain documented information, again, as evidence. Also, to note, it requires that you ensure environmental information communicated is reliable. It's consistent across the environmental management system, and again, it's reliable. So this may come down in terms of who's responsible for communicating answers externally to, you know, information or queries received or questions from employees, making sure that it's being directed to whoever is responsible for that, so those answers can be consistent, even if it's various responsible parties, making sure that information is reliable and the same. And again, that all of those are being responded to, and we've got documented information to be able to back that up and show that those have been implemented. There are separate sections for internal communication and external communication. Again, the idea is that you're enabling your employees or subcontractors or whoever we're talking about here, you're enabling them to do their job within the controls of the management system, to contribute to environmental continual improvement, to contribute to improvements in the environmental performance, to not be contributing to spills or accidents or anything outside of the goals of the management system. So it's really putting the onus on the organization to make sure they're communicating what needs to be communicated. Externally, again, planning that process, considering the items mentioned earlier in the clause, as well as taking into consideration compliance obligations. 7.5 is the section for documented information that delves more deeply into different avenues, different ways of meeting these requirements, because again, to update to various technology changes, you have some more leeway as far as how you want to meet those requirements. And these are different areas to consider as well. You know, the size of the organization, the type of activities performed, the complexity of the processes, the competency of the person or people in charge of maintaining that documented information. And then as well as how it will be controlled. How will it be identified, the format, how will it be reviewed or approved, how will it be protected from loss of confidentiality, loss of integrity, how will it be distributed, how will it be stored, how will it be retained, all of those areas. Not really new, not a new concept as far as document control was always an element, but again, it's been broadened to address various other media types and ways that companies may be maintaining that information without the focus on documented procedures necessarily. Again, that's still an acceptable method if you decide that that's what works for your company and you're used to doing that way. You certainly don't have to make any changes in that area. You can continue to do so. but this certainly gives you more flexibility if you determine that that's not as effective or you'd like to go another route in the future. So this is the rest of that section continued on the next slide. Section 8 deals with operation. Again, I'm going through these pretty quickly because you have access to the standard and the verbiage is on these slides, but again, type any questions you may have. Section 8 is operation, addressing the adequacy of operational controls as well as emergency preparedness and response. We see the same ideas, emphasis on processes versus documented procedures. Section 8 has been broadened as well to allow for a very wide range of controls, including procedures, because again, if that's what works for your company, you're not required to switch gears and go a different route. But whatever your organization deems appropriate and effective in preventing deviations from the management system, from client compliance obligations, and all of those areas that you've identified. Increases required controls regarding outsourcing and the life cycle perspective, and we touched on these terms, the introduction of these terms. So this is an area where we certainly see more significant changes. So we'll take a closer look at that. Operational planning and control, again, establishing operating criteria, implementing those controls, monitoring those controls, taking action to mitigate any adverse effects. Not too significantly different. Now here we talk about outsourced processes, again, thinking in terms of any outsourcing that can have an impact on your environmental performance. The type and extent of control or influence shall be defined by the organization within the management system. So again, you've got that leeway there, but you're certainly expected to be considering that. Again, same idea, life cycle perspective in terms of the areas in which your organization can actually control the life cycle perspective, any aspects that are relevant there, things to consider, controls to establish, determining any requirements that the organization is going to implement, keeping in mind this new life cycle perspective. Communicating again with contractors, we see that reiterated here. And as always, maintaining documented information. So these are kind of new concepts. The clauses are written pretty generally. Again, the idea is more areas to consider. They want when you're implementing the changes to the standard, consider these areas. There's more of an emphasis than perhaps there was before. Consider, A, B, C, D, whatever the clause indicates. Make sure you're aware of those areas. You've considered the risks. You've implemented controls. A little bit a new way of thinking about some of these areas. Not really significant changes as far as emergency preparedness and response goes. Still required to determine how the organization will respond, test and review those processes, make changes as necessary, maintain the documented information. Section 9, performance evaluation, covers monitoring and measurement of environmental performance, evaluations of compliance, internal audits, and management reviews. So all of these have been grouped together a little bit differently than they were before. Again, emphasis on processes versus documented procedures. We've seen that in the past. There's some new communication requirements as far as the results of monitoring and measurement and environmental performance. Again, as I said earlier, we see an emphasis on what is expected to be communicated both internally and externally. This was an area that I think not all organizations were always as strong on as they could be, not necessarily having that information as readily available or as widely communicated as it could have been. Internal audits extend really only to the extent that the risk expectations have been expanded. So not significant changes to internal audit expectations themselves, but as your system grows to incorporate a wider view of risks required by the 2015 revision, the internal audit is obviously expected to pick up those changes, to be evaluating that they've been considered and implemented. Management review, same thing, not significant changes as far as the inputs and outputs, but there, again, this is reflecting the additional emphasis on communication and environmental performance. So we have the section for monitoring and measurement, analysis and evaluation. Again, what needs to be monitored and measured, how the organization is going to do that, when the results will be evaluated, how that will be communicated, and retaining documented information as always. Also keeping in mind that if your compliance obligations dictate any specific monitoring and measuring or communication of such, that gets certainly incorporated. Evaluation of compliance, not significantly different. You can see the verbiage here. Again, as always, retaining documented information as evidence. Internal audit verbiage, conducting internal audits at planned intervals. That's always been the requirement. Making sure the organization is in line with the standard as well as its own requirements. The only thing that perhaps is relevant, again, take into consideration the environmental importance. You know, how significant are those processes, the impact that they could have on the environment or the aspects or risks, any changes affecting the organization, certainly take into consideration things that have changed since the last audit, and again, also certainly take into consideration results of previous audits, areas that were found, you know, to have more weaknesses than others should certainly, as always, warrant a little bit more attention the following year at least, as far as follow-up and making sure any corrective actions implemented were effective, changes have taken hold, and those issues no longer exist. And as always, you guessed it, retain documented information as evidence. So again, we see that verbiage repeated throughout. As far as management review, 9.3 still breaks down, or 9.3 now, the numbering has changed, but management review still breaks down what is expected to be covered as far as inputs and outputs. External, internal issues, communication, the needs and expectations of interested parties, including compliance obligations. Oops, sorry. Risks and opportunities, environmental objectives, environmental performance, nonconformities. This is really not new. Outputs, same idea. There might be a couple new items as the verbiage of the standard has changed, but it still breaks down for you what is required to be discussed, what is required to be decided upon, or any outputs that should be captured, and then retaining documented information as evidence. So again, you've got some more flexibility as how you do that, but you need to be able to clearly show that the process is considering these inputs, is capturing these outputs, is discussing and establishing any changes that are needed as far as these criteria for discussion. Lastly, Section 10 covers improvement. It addresses specifically corrective action, continual improvement expectations. A lot of these are repetitive, again, emphasizing processes instead of documented procedures. It outlines what is expected to be considered and documented for evidence for corrective actions, investigating nonconformities. We'll look at that. There's a bit of a graded approach here. Removes the 2015 revision has removed specific reference to preventive action. However, this is important to note. The intent is captured according to the standard in sections 4.1 and 6.1. So really, and again, this is worth noting, the requirements for preventive actions, or the expectation that preventive actions will be captured, has not gone away. Preventive action is still relevant. It's still a very helpful tool, and again, is implied or is intended to be captured in section 4.1 and 6.1. So you don't see the term anymore, but that tool should still be implemented. And again, we have an emphasis on environmental performance and improvement methods to be determined by the organization. So again, we've got some more flexibility here. It's pretty general, 10.1, determining opportunities for improvement and implementing any actions to achieve them. References some other sections of the standard as well. You guys can read through this. As well as 10.2, nonconformity and corrective action. Here again, we can see the breakdown as far as what the organizations should consider, how they're reacting to nonconformities, what they're evaluating in their process in terms of any actions that may be necessary, corrective actions. This will also help guide you in terms of your documented information as far as evidence. When this is telling you what needs to be considered, what needs to be done, we should be able to see as auditors evidence of those areas having been completed. And this calls out specifically that the documented information shall be retained based on the nature of the nonconformities, any subsequent actions taken, and the results of those actions. And again, you're still required to review the effectiveness of any corrective actions taken. You can see that here. And then again, it comes back to continual improvement. The expectation is, as always, continual improvement, improving environmental performance, improving the adequacy of the management system. All of this comes full circle. Okay, so I went through that pretty quickly again because you guys can all access the verbiage now and it's on the slides. I didn't want to read through them all, but those are some of the key changes. As far as the steps for certification, obviously if you already have a management system in place, you're going to focus on updating the documentation or updating the management system to meet these new requirements. You may be taking advantage of the flexibility of the documented information to get rid of some of those procedures if you wish, and finding other ways to meet those requirements and have that demonstrated documented information as evidence. If you're new to the program and you will be establishing your system to meet the 2015 revision requirements, the first area, the first place to start would be establishing that documented information, how you're going to have evidence, have that documented information as far as meeting the various requirements of the standards, some of which we discussed today. So establishing that documentation, establishing the management system. Obviously, after that, once all of that has been created, you're going to want to conduct training to these requirements, whether, again, it's updating to the changed requirements or training outright for the first time to become certified and make sure everyone is aware of what they need to be aware of, to be communicating what needs to be communicated, and establishing that competency. Certainly, you're going to implement the requirements, which includes conducting internal audits, conducting compliance evaluations, conducting reviews based on the input from internal audit, conducting a management review. Conducting the management review after the internal audit gives you the ability to discuss certainly the internal audit itself, how it went, any findings or corrective actions, and get the full picture there. At any point throughout the process, you can contract with a certification body. Certainly, we would not be moving forward with an audit until all of those have been completed. You need the internal audit and the management review, but you could certainly set up a contract at any point, and you can reach out to PJR to do so. The contact information will be at the end of the presentation. And then once contracted, we'll set up your Stage 1 and Stage 2 audits. Stage 1 focuses on the framework of the standard having been implemented, kind of laying the groundwork, and stage 2 focuses on the implementation itself of those requirements, that it's effective in meeting the requirements of the standard and has been, again, effectively implemented to the point where we feel certainly comfortable providing a certificate showing that you're ISO 14001:2015 certified. If any nonconformities result from the stage 2 audits, they would be required to be closed out prior to certification being issued, and we would discuss that process further at that time. Many of you are probably already familiar with it. It follows the corrective action expectations of the standard as well. The transition process, again, keeping in mind the publication date of September 15th, 2015, we have 3 years to transition from the date of publication. Companies can continue to get certified to the 2004 version if you're being certified for the first time, or you're transitioning for 18 months following the date of publication. So again, 18 months from September 15th, 2015. After 18 months, no new certificates to the 2004 version will be issued, and we'll only be able to conduct initial certifications to ISO 14001:2015. However, if you're already certified and you're transitioning your certification from the 2004 version to 2015, you have 3 years from the publication date to wrap that up. And again, that process includes addressing any nonconformities from the audit itself to make sure that prior to issuing that certificate, prior to the expiration of your certificate, we've buttoned all of those issues up and can now issue the certificate to 2015. Just in general, for anyone who's not already aware, stage 1 audits, again, like I said, evaluate the framework. Are you ready to move on to stage 2? Prior to stage 1, we conduct at PJR a review of documents in-house just to make sure stage 1 isn't premature. But then we move on to stage 1. Once stage 1 is completed and any issues have been rectified, stage 2 proceeds about 30 to 45 days afterwards. Reviews the entire management system for implementation and effectiveness. And again, to reiterate, any nonconformities would need to be resolved prior to issuing a certificate. Surveillance audits subsequent to certification. So after the stage 1 and stage 2, we start the rotation of surveillance audits scheduled at either 6 or 12-month intervals depending on your specific contract. And that's a partial system audit. So where at stage 2 and recertification we cover the entire management system, the surveillance audits are partial. We don't cover every single process, every single requirement necessarily at every surveillance audit. The recertification audit then will be 3 years. It's a 3-year cycle, so on the 3rd anniversary of the initial certification, you get the recertification audit, which again is the entire management system. The 3-year cycle begins again. Surveillance audit, followed by surveillance audit if you're on an annual schedule, followed by the recertification again. That process will obviously be gone through with you at the time of establishing the contract, through the quoting process, specifically how it will impact your organization as far as if it's semi-annual or annual audits, and that breakdown would certainly be communicated to you. So at this time, we'll open it up for questions. If you can type any questions, I'll give you a couple minutes to do that while I check and see if we already have any. We can discuss that. We've got a couple of minutes left. Okay, so it looks like we do have one question here. What does PJR expect to be the biggest changes that their clients need to make? What areas of the auditor's workbook will have the biggest changes? So I can I can answer that very generally at this point. Obviously, with the standard just having been published, we have not published the revision to the workbooks yet. But in general, certainly I highlighted at the beginning of the presentation the most significant areas of change. We'll see an emphasis on leadership, the decreased emphasis on documented procedures, looking more at the process implemented and how that documented information has been maintained as evidence. Those are certainly going to be significant adjustments, incorporating the life cycle perspective. That will have an impact depending on the various organizations' processes, based on their, their product, their services, whatever it is that they do could have more or less of an impact on that organization specifically. That will vary. Certainly outsourcing, increased communication. So there are various key changes. And again, I would say that their significance will vary depending on, from organization to organization, depending on their organization's activities or services that they provide. So I can't answer that too specifically, but certainly if you have a specific question related to a specific organization, we could always talk offline about that. If you'd like, you can email me. My contact information is on the next slide. We'll get to that. You can always email me, and then I can follow up with you more specifically as far as a specific organization or client and how it may impact them. In terms of the workbooks, again, we haven't released those changes, but certainly we will have to change our approach a bit as auditors, what types of evidence we're looking for, what is acceptable when we talk about documented information, and making sure that even though companies may not be required to have those same documented procedures, that we're looking for sufficient evidence and it's still able to be clear that they're meeting the requirements of the standard before we issue any certifications. I know off the top of my head, as an auditor, that will be a very significant change. Have to kind of take each audit as it comes and see how people are maintaining that evidence to have that comfort level that the requirements of the standard are being met. So we'll certainly be revising our workbooks to reflect the changed verbiage, reflect the new terms, and certainly, again, broaden the expectations for what will be acceptable in that area. Okay, it looks like we have one more question. Can I get a copy of the 14,001 2015 standard from PJR? As far as I'm aware, no. I can always double check on that for you if you'd like to send me an email. But it was explained to me that copies of the standard are available through the ISO website. So I would suggest that route. Okay. I don't see any other questions at this time. Again, if you think of anything after the fact, my contact information is listed here. Again, I'm Austin Matthews. Also, Scott Jones is available if you've dealt with him in the past. We work pretty closely. We can get together if there are any questions that I can't answer. I'll certainly look into them further and get back to you. My email address is listed here. If you'd like the slides emailed to you also, you can send me an email and I can send them to you. The recorded webinar with the slides will be available, I would think by tomorrow. And then also I mentioned for a quote or any other information from the sales department, their contact information, their phone number is listed on this slide as well. If you'd like to get some more specific information as to how your organization's audits would be scheduled, anything like that, the sales department can help you as well. Okay, I think that's everything if we have no further questions. Thank you guys so much for participating today. Again, shoot me an email if you've got any other questions, give me a call. We can discuss it more specifically. Part 1 of the webinar is available on the website, on PJR's website as well. Thank you for participating, and I hope you all have a great day.